Welcome back in, everybody, to another edition of the Hawks mock draft right here with the 710 ESPN Seattle team. I am Paul Gallant. With me, it is the man, the myth, the legend, the quarterback, Jake Heaps. Here's how things are going to work. I am, well, let's just face it, dumb. So I need help when it comes to conducting the Seahawks draft. Who better to help me out than the guy that helped us get through, I thought, quite the impressive draft last time around. It is Jake Heaps. Jake, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I am doing very well.
You ready to do another one of these?
100%. Last time around, I felt like we made the Seahawks better. Hopefully, and again, I got to listen to Jake's advice here, and I will try my best to do that. That is what we will do to make the Seahawks better for this coming season, of course, assuming that it happens. So we have gone to thedraftnetwork.com to put together a mock draft. Basically, it simulates all the picks that lead up to the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks have the first pick at pick number 27. We're going to assume that John Schneider / Jake Heaps, who are now, I guess, John Schneider, have not traded back and are going to make that first pick at pick number 27. So the draft board that is available in front of us right now, Jake, shows a couple of names. Remember last time around, we were looking at the offensive line. We were assuming that there were some decisions made about the edge rusher position. None have been made yet, so maybe that's a direction that we go. Right now, what do you think we should do?
Well, for a couple different options that you have here, it really comes down to who is on the board remaining that really makes a difference for this team. I think this draft, more so than any other draft, it's about impact, right? It's not about depth at this point. You've been able to acquire depth. You've done a good job through that in your offseason of getting good depth players, good rotational pass rushers. Gosh, you've got 17 offensive linemen. I mean, you've been able to acquire some depth on your team and competition. Now you've got to go find those impactful pieces. So, Paul, I'm going to put it back on you. What are a couple positions that you really feel the Seahawks need impact-wise to make a difference for this team in come 2020?
All right. Well, going into this year and assuming that if you draft an offensive lineman, that guy's going to be working behind the scenes. Right now, the Seahawks have yet to address the pass rushing situation. I would like to bring in somebody who can do that. And there's also something else that I've been thinking about. I like the contract that Christian McCaffrey got this week. I think that the guy is a unicorn at running back. I think he's one of the very few running backs that you can look at and say he's actually worth that kind of money. And if you compare him to other situations across the NFL, I think his situation is different than that led to Todd Gurley's and to Devontae Freeman's and Le'Veon Bell's, etc., their contracts. So I feel like running back is something at the very least I'm thinking about, though I know that would make a lot of people unhappy if they were to draft a running back in the first round 2 years after drafting a running back in the first round and bringing in Rashad Penny. So running back is another one. And I think also defensive tackle depth too. So defense was the biggest issue for the team this past season. Let's start with the defense.
Okay. So where we're looking at here, this is one of those interesting scenarios, Paul, that I think when you look at the edge, right, you got AJ Espinenza, Zach Bond. To me, Zach Bond is more of a 3-4 defensive end than he is a 4-3 defensive end. Joshua Uche from Michigan's really intriguing. Julian Okwara from Notre Dame has that explosive twitch. AJ Espinenza is a guy that, look, I think maybe someone you steer clear of from the standpoint that he is not at the combine. He didn't run a 4.7, 4.6. He didn't show massive explosion, but when you watch his film, you really, really like how productive he is. But I think the Seahawks are more known for finding that guy that isn't as much talked about, but is very twitched up. So on the edge, what I would say here, Paul, for the guys that are available, I really like Julian Okwara. And I like Joshua Uche out of Michigan. Those would be the two edge rushers that I'd go for. Now, let's go to the interior lineman, Paul.
Yeah.
Let's see who are available, and then I'm going to throw one more twist at you before you make your pick. Okay. All right. Neville Gallimore from Oklahoma, extremely disruptive. To me, you've got a ton of guys here on the interior of your defensive line that would be great fits here. Neville Gallimore, extremely disruptive. Marlon Davidson brings a great versatility on defensive tackle, defensive end. He packed on some more weight, so he's really trying to be a versatile 3 technique. Ross Blacklock is a very intriguing pass rushing guy from TCU, and Justin Matabuike from Texas A&M is really the guy that I would love to get in this draft personally. He's available, but you could take the risk and him possibly be there in the second round. So that would be a gamble if you did not pick him in this point. But when you mentioned running back, okay, I would normally not want to take a running back in the first round also, okay? But I'm going to throw this at you. Let's go to the running backs here. This actually played into our hands very, very interestingly because DeAndre Swift is the #1 running back in this draft by far. Very talented, durable, big playability. J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Taylor, these 3 guys really have unique traits and abilities. And if DeAndre Swift was available at this point for the Seahawks, he's a guy that I would really, really be interested in, knowing that some of those other guys might be there in the second round. So to me, the way I'm looking at this is I think that there's some good edge rushers that still will be available in the second round. Defensive tackle and running back is the position that I would be looking at this point, Paul, with those with those ideal situations that you just mentioned to me of what you're looking for. I think if you're going to go with your defensive line, I would go interior, and I would either get Neville Gallimore or Justin Matabuike, or I would go running back and take DeAndre Swift or Jonathan Taylor, but more so with DeAndre Swift.
Okay, so I'm thinking about it, and I know that when it comes to Matabuike, he is at least listed per this as a guy who is a middle of the second round kind of pick. But I think sometimes you got to make a risk. I think sometimes you have to take one. And I'm going to hope that some of those running backs continue to slide. Maybe it doesn't happen. So I'm going to go with Matabuike here. I feel like that's one of those players, when you look at where he played in the SEC West and all of that, I think that also is another thing that you can sort of point at and say, yeah, this guy, man, he's gone up against really good competition. So I'm taking a reach here. I'm not sure he is going to be available that late. I'm going to take the guy that Jake has sold me on. So that is our first pick. Justin Matabuike.
And I would feel good about this. Look, it is a reach. He's a guy that I think could have securely been in the second round. But last time in our mock draft, Paul, I was hoping that after we picked Austin Jackson that he would be there available to us, and he was not. So, sometimes in those you have to take what you think is best for your system, and that's where you see guys that are mocked, and normally in certain situations, they move way up on the board than what everybody was anticipating. Justin Matabuike is a dominant run defender, first, second down, and he has pass rushing ability. He has explosion. He's not a perfect pass rusher at this point, but certainly somebody who's going to bring edge. He's going to bring explosion, and going to be an effective contributor for you, as a rookie.
What I'm looking at now, Jake Heaps, as we are on the clock with pick number 59. Interior defensive line is still on the board, though I think also you have to keep an eye on running back. You got to keep an eye on cornerback. And if there is a wide receiver that we really like that has fallen this far, that is also something that I think we should be open to. I'm very curious to see who is available at this point in time right now at the cornerback position.
Okay. At the cornerback position. So you don't think Quentin Dunbar is enough at this point for the Seahawks?
It's not that as much as, and I know that the Seahawks, they look at that position and think that they can find guys that'll help them out. My big question is not about Quentin Dunbar or Shaquille Griffin. I think one of those guys is going to be on this team long term, but I'm not sure both will, because both are in contract years, and you have to think about the long-term future of this team at the same time. So are any of these cornerbacks that are on the board guys that you would entertain?
Yeah, there's 2 guys right off the top that I would really entertain. One, Trevon Diggs. I think that he's got the size, he's got the playmaking ability that the Seahawks would want and look for. Obviously, the brother of Stephon Diggs. But the other aspect of it that he really brings to the table is also the fact that he was an effective punt and kick returner. and something that the Seahawks are still looking for. They're looking for that aspect and wanting to pass that torch on from Tyler Lockett so he can be a full-time receiver. And I think Trevon Diggs definitely brings that ability. Another name that maybe not everybody's talking about that I think could be interesting is Darnay Holmes from UCLA. Now, the reason why I talk about Darnay Holmes is not because he's an outside corner, but because he is a nickel. I think that he's one of the best nickel corners in this draft. That's becoming an ever increasingly important position. Ugo Amadi doesn't seem to me as a guy that has totally won over the confidence of this Seahawks defense, although I think the world of him. I think he's a great player. I think he could be a very effective nickel corner. You want to add some competition and add a guy who's extremely productive in that role. I think Darnay Holmes could really make sense there. But if I'm going to go corner, I'm going to pick Trevon Diggs. What's another position that you're thinking of, Paul?
Definitely curious about where the running back position stands right now, and I'm hoping that someone has slid, though it did look like that the guys that we like the most are all off the board. I have heard a lot of interesting things about Antonio Gibson over the last couple of days. What do you know about this guy?
Yeah, Antonio Gibson, a highly productive player. I think that this is a guy that when you talk about, towards the draft, you're going to find some players that are going to find their way that from their production. This is a player that maybe Antonio Gibson would be getting even more love had there been pro days, had there been visits. And so definitely an intriguing prospect. But for me, I think more so than anything else, you're going to see a draft where there are going to be very few chances being taken. You're going to see more guys from Power 5 conferences than ever before because NFL teams are not going to take the chances on those young players. So for me, thinking from that aspect, I would take Cam Akers. I would take Eno Benjamin, Zach Moss. I think that there's some good running backs still left, and I would look at this point of waiting in the draft for one of those guys to fall into our lap, maybe in the 3rd or 4th round. So at this point, I'm not really intrigued by who we have left on the board here. But
definitely feels like we would be reaching for some of these guys right now, and that we can maybe wait. In fact, until the fourth pick that the Seahawks have, their 3rd round pick. So let's go back to cornerback. I think that Trevon Diggs is the guy to go with right here. I feel like that returner side of things that you brought up is a real selling point, and you have a guy that theoretically can be one of your starting corners, because let's just assume they're not going to bring back both Shaquille Griffin and Quentin Dunbar. This actually might be, between those two, a tryout for who is the number 1, if you will, cornerback for the Seahawks going forward. I know they don't technically do things that way, but I think you're only going to pick one between the two next year. So let's pick Diggs.
Okay.
And that makes us go to pick number 64. Pick number 64, okay. So we've addressed some things on the defensive side, and I'm curious as to if any of the wide receivers that have been talked about a lot, Jake, that you like are still left on the board, because this is a wide receiver loaded draft.
It is a very loaded draft. I think there's some intriguing prospects still left. And when you talk about the receiver position overall, so if we can take a look at the receiver position, I think that would help us out here. And you have a couple names that really stand out to me. The biggest thing that you're looking for when it comes to the receiver draft is you're looking for explosion. You're looking for impact. To me, I'm not looking for a slot guy. I think that the Seahawks are already pretty filled at that position. So I think that, you got Tyler Lockett, you got John Ursua. To me, it's about finding that complementary piece to Tyler and DK on the outside. Michael Pittman Jr. out of USC, he is a reliable player. He's tough. He's physical. He was a captain. I really like him, but he is a possession receiver all the way. He is not going to be a game breaker. He doesn't possess, a tremendous amount of speed and separation, but a very good player. Chenault Jr. out of Colorado, to me, is a receiver that he screams upside. This is one of the best receivers in this draft. If you just talk about talents on the field, find a way to get this guy the football. But he is injury plagued. Now, DK Metcalf had that same concern coming out of Ole Miss, and he was a very effective receiver for the Seahawks this past season. So don't be too concerned about that aspect. I really like Chenault Jr. here. I think that would be an awesome situation. Chase Claypool, I picked him in my last mock draft. I really like him. I'm a big fan of him, or actually, I didn't. I took Brandon Ayuk, but I'm a big fan of Chase Claypool. He is like a DK Metcalf clone, essentially, and I think he could be a really good fit there. So to me, at this point, with what you have and you're looking at, I would be looking at Chenault Jr. or I'd be looking at Chase Claypool.
Okay, so we'll have those two guys, and we'll write that down really quickly. Now, let's look at the tackle position as well, because this is a loaded tackle draft, and the Seahawks definitely have to think about that long term with Dwayne Brown up there in age. Are any of these guys intriguing to you?
Yeah, I would say Lucas Niang is interesting, but Prince Tege Wanago, I know I just butchered his name for sure, but he's a player that I really like out of Auburn. And he would be a player that I think would be even higher on people's boards if it was not for the fact that he has faced some injury issues. But a very intriguing story, coming over from Africa, and had a tremendous, upbringing. So when you talk about grit, you talk about perseverance, he's been through a lot. And so, the kid out of Auburn is somebody that I would be very interested in, no questions about it. That's Matthew Pert from UConn is another guy who's a really good player that not a whole lot of people are talking about. So one of those two for me, if you're going to go offensive tackle, would be who I would pick.
Okay, so wide receiver or offensive tackle, we got to pick between them. I'm honestly not sold either way necessarily. Which direction would you go to? Would you be jumping on the table and banging and making some noises for, Jake, if I were in this situation and I couldn't decide between a wide receiver and a tackle?
Yeah, at this point for me, I would really be looking at wide receiver. I would go with Chenault Jr. I think he brings a tremendous amount of upside. He brings that dynamic impact that can, he can be used in a variety of different ways. He can be your fly sweep reverse guy.
I'm sold. I want fly sweep reverses.
But he's much more than that too. I mean, he can be a down the field threat. So I'm going to go with Chenault Jr. I'm going to feel really excited about it.
All right. So now we move on to the third round where the Seahawks are on the clock. So we got a wide receiver. We got a cornerback. We got a defensive lineman that we think could give us not only an ability to stop the run, but an ability to get after the passer as well. And now the big question is, all right, so what should we be looking at? I think we continue to look at the offensive line situation. I think that also, on top of looking at the offensive line, I think you got to look at the running back spot too. Has someone fallen into a spot that we liked? That maybe is it A.J. Dillon? Maybe is it somebody that can potentially take the load off of a guy in Chris Carson who we're not 100% sure is going to be healthy going into the year, coming off of the hip injury. And the same thing, you say that for Rashad Penny. So what are we doing right now? Let's take a look first at the running backs, if we could. So who do you like of the guys here, and who would be a realistic choice as well, seeing as we're picking with pick number 101 right now?
Yeah, out of these guys right now, the two that stand out to me are Zach Moss and A.J. Dillon. Those two players, they bring size, they bring physicality, they bring durability. To me, those two guys fit this system the best, very clearly. So you could theoretically go with another pick. A.J. Dillon should be around still at this point. I'm really not sure why so many people are against A.J. Dillon in this draft, or why he's rated so low. I mean, at his size, he ran a freakish 40 time, a great vertical leap. This is at his size, an explosive player. But Zach Moss is a guy who can be effective in the passing game, which is something we know they tried to do with Rashad Penny in the screen game, and definitely can be a reliable, tough physical runner. So Zach Moss is somebody, if you're going to go in that area, I would really look at Zach Moss if you're going to take a running back at this point. Another thing that I would look at is edge rusher as well.
Okay. Edge rusher, and then we'll go back to tackle after edge rusher just to see who's available. Of these guys at edge rusher, who do you like, Jake?
I love Bradley Anae. I think Bradley Anae is a guy that he is tough. He's physical. He's extremely productive. Now, he ran a 4.9 40, but when you put on the tape, he does not play that way. At the Senior Bowl, they clocked him at 18 miles per hour. So that it's not really indicative of a 4.9 type of player. He's got, a certain presence about him. So when you talk about not just getting a highly productive player, you're getting a guy with a great amount of edge to him that's going to bring some of that toughness, that attitude back to this defense that they have been missing. Alton Robinson, again, is a player that I really like in this draft. I know you like him, Syracuse guy. He's a guy that I think could find immediate success in the league. Super twitchy. He's a one-trick pony, though. He doesn't have a whole lot of counter moves, but I do know that through the combine, he was working with Cliff Averill very closely. But he's a guy that you might be able to get away with, here later in the 4th round. But if it was me right now picking edge rusher, I would be going with Bradley Anae.
Really quickly, let's take a look at the offensive tackles. It's an offensive tackle loaded draft, supposedly. Any of these guys float your boat, or should we be going with the edge rusher? Because I think you sold me on Bradley Anae.
Yeah, I would be continuing to hold out on the offensive tackles at this point.
Okay, so let's go back to the edge rusher, and let's bring in an edge rusher. The Seahawks need some edge rushers. They need some defensive line depth. Bradley Anae, come on down. You're coming from Utah to the Seattle Seahawks. So they get another Utah player on the defensive side of things. Okay, so now we got to wait. We got to wait. So at this point, Jake, off the top of your head, what positions should we be looking at now that we're getting to the back of the draft? Should we just be looking at players that we really like?
Yeah, we should be looking at players that we really like, players that we think that, add value to this group. And you look at the big board here. We've already addressed edge. We've addressed our interior of our defensive line, receivers, the cornerback position. So really, at this point, what you're going to be looking to do is you're going to be looking to fill that running back position potentially. Maybe A.J. Dillon is still around, right? And hopefully he's still on the board. And if he is there,
he's there. Bring him home.
If he's there, then you've got a chance. Now, here's the other thing you got to look at. His rank is 152. So on the board, do you think that you could get away with going with the pick at 133 and then getting a chance to get him at 144? That's something that, you look at. Are you willing to risk that potential situation of holding out because there's a player that you like before, or do you just want to go ahead and secure A.J. Dillon, your running back, Chris Carson?
I want to go ahead and take care of him because I think right now when you look at Carson, it's not just that he's coming off the hip injury. You're also looking at a guy who's going into the last year of his contract. And look, Chris Carson can do more than just be a power runner and a bruiser. We've all seen that he actually is pretty capable if you do give him the opportunity to maybe catch a pass or two. But I think A.J. Dillon gives you a really nice security blanket going into this season. It helps you maybe allow for more recovery, for less of a rush back by both Penny and Carson, and it gives you a potential workhorse of the future. So let's bring in A.J. Dillon.
Okay.
So now you move on to pick 144, which we could have had A.J. Dillon at theoretically, but you know what? I just wanted the guy. I was jonesing for a big ol' running back. Right now, Jake, what do you think the needs are?
For me personally, the way you look at this, I look at the big board here. There's not one guy that really stands out to me on the big board just right off the top. The way that you're looking and saying there's a guy here left that we absolutely have to have. So now we're looking at positional needs. And I think when you look at positional needs, although you have 17 offensive linemen, that's just the off season here, Paul. They're not going to keep those guys. And so what I think that you need to look at here is I think you need to look at your interior offensive line because you have Mike Upati on a 1-year deal. You have DJ Fluker on a 1-year deal. And the fact of the matter is you can tell me that you like Phil Haynes and Jamarco Jones all you want. But if you're not willing at this point to give them a chance to compete for a starting job, then that tells me everything I need to know right now. Okay. So I like Michael Onwenu. I think that he is a big body. Look at this guy's list, 6'3", 350 pounds. Now, normally with a guy like this, I am worried about his foot speed, his mobility, his ability to get to the second level. Well, guess what? The Seahawks and Mike Solari's run game and Brian Schottenheimer, they don't really value that. This is not a zone scheme that they're trying to create a bunch of double teams. They are trying to move people. They are trying to get big bodies and move people down the line. And so I think that that's something that they're going to look for. Another big-bodied guy. Could you pull up Solomon Kinley here from Georgia? Already kind of highlighted over his name here. Another big-bodied mover, 6'4", 336 pounds. These are two guys that I think that when you talk about scheme fit, I think these guys are two scheme fit guys that you can develop, that you can really push towards, trying to push these older players and really have good, strong backup options for you if they're not available during the year, which was something that really hurt this team, moving forward. So I would really be looking at the interior of the offensive line right now. Solomon Kidley or Michael Onwenu. Onwenu would be a guy that I would definitely put a priority over, though.
All right, let's do Onwenu. I like hearing that he's violent. I want to see the Seahawks have some guys on their offensive line that maybe if they're not protecting Russell Wilson the way that we'd want, and maybe if Russell Wilson, hold the ball a little bit too long, we got a guy here who can help that running game for the Seahawks continue to be what it was last season, at the very least, when the two running backs that we typically see, Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, were healthy. So one more pick left for the Seattle Seahawks in this draft, and we're getting closer and closer and closer and closer to it.
How do we feel about this draft so far, Paul? How do we feel like we've done to finish this thing out?
I like that we've gotten somebody at a bunch of positions on the defense. I like that we brought in a wide receiver, and that there's a running back, and that there's an interior offensive lineman. I'm not going to lie, though. I feel like I failed in my ability to bring in an offensive tackle. And at this point, what tackle realistically is going to fall to the 7th round that you feel really good about long-term, that you think could be potentially someone who challenges one of these starters? I'm not really sure that one's going to be available at this point, but I could be wrong. I don't know what you see here, Jake, but tell me what you see.
Well, actually, Paul, I was planning this as I saw where you were going about the 3rd round. There was a guy that I had in mind that I thought would be a pretty good fit here for the Seahawks, and taking a late round flyer on this player for the offensive tackle position. And that player to me is Calvin Throckmorton out of Oregon. He's a big downhill physical guy. If you could highlight his name and his profile, 6'5", 310 pounds. I think that this guy, playing under Mario Cristobal, I think he brings a lot to the table. And, another fun thing is that this is a Northwest kid. And I think that this guy has a lot of upside potentially. And I think that he has the chance to be good and the passing situation as well. So a guy who can be well-rounded in the run game and as a pass blocker. It's a late-round flyer, but in terms of having a guy who's stable behind Brandon Shell and maybe push Brandon Shell, I like my chances of Calvin Throckmorton getting it done at this point in the game. Trey Adams was more of a left tackle, Throckmorton a right tackle. And so he could really slide over and play that position immediately. Trey Adams, to me, is a guy that unfortunately in his career, he was a shining bright star as a freshman, sophomore. And I really think that back injury really hurt him, because he is not a tester. I think that he could potentially be a solid backup in this league, but I don't see him being a full-fledged starter. He just doesn't have the quickness and power to get it done. But I think Calvin Throckmorton really does. So let's go with
Throckmorton then.
Our last pick in the draft, Calvin Throckmorton. I think that he's going to surprise a lot of people when he comes to camp.
So there we go. And the Seattle Seahawks draft that we have put together, with me sort of holding on to the reins and Jake keeps telling me what to do. We bring in an interior pass rusher who can stop the run as well, and Justin Matabuke. Trevon Diggs out of Alabama at cornerback to potentially give you some depth going forward. A receiver, an edge rusher, a running back, an interior offensive lineman, and a tackle. Jake, well, how do you think we did?
I thought we did pretty good. I like what we added here. The one pick that I think that we maybe might have reached a little bit is with Trevon Diggs here. The only reason why I say that is because I do understand the long-term look at it. You're going to create a massive amount of depth on your cornerback positions. You have Trey Flowers, Trevon Diggs, Shaquille Griffin, and Quentin Dunbar. But I think that maybe we could have went with another player at that spot in the second round. But the one thing I do love is that he can sit for a year, maybe then take a stronger role the year following, and he could contribute right away as a kick punt returner. So that aspect I do feel really good about, that he can be an impact to the team right away in that area. Madubuike, look, he was a second rounder from the grades that everybody else had on a mock draft, but in terms of need, in terms of explosiveness, I think this is a pick that was a good one in terms of what the Seahawks need. So overall, I think you did pretty good here, Paul.
Well, thank you, Jake. I appreciate that, and I would not have been able to do it without your guidance. This was the latest edition of the 710 Hawks mock draft. There will be more to come as we get closer and closer to the Seahawks on the draft next week. Make sure that you catch Jake Heaps along with Tom Wassel and Stacy Ross, Tom, Jake, and Stacy every single afternoon from noon to 3. And, of course, made along with Danny O'Neill, Danny and Gallant, 7 to 10 every single morning on 710 ESPN Seattle. Jakes, it has been a pleasure. You have yourself a wonderful day.
You too. Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Howdy and Taylor, for putting this thing together. You guys are awesome.
Yes, 100%. Thank you to them as well. Go Hawks.